Welcome back. The 13th to the 20th of February marks the National Epilepsy Week. The Neurological Association of South Africa has, for the past few years, championed causes dedicated to breaking the stigma surrounding epilepsy and creating an understanding of the condition affecting about 1 in 100 South Africans. Approximately 1 in 26 South Africans will develop epilepsy and 1 in 10 will experience an epileptic seizure during their lifetime. According to studies, much of their suffering is not inflicted by the condition, but rather by the perceptions of those who have not had an epileptic seizure. Experts say epilepsy is a neurological condition characterized by brief, excessive electrical activity in the brain, and this happens to anyone at any age, and nobody is immune to it. The frequency differs from person to person, with some having many seizures in a single day to weekly, monthly or yearly, whilst some have had a handful over many decades. While the risk of death during a seizure is small, seeking medical treatment and adhering to prescribed medication is crucial preventing such outcomes. For more on this, we're now joined by Dr. James Butler, neurologist and executive board member of the Neurological Association of South Africa, and he joins us via our video link. Dr. James, thank you so much for joining us this evening here on SABC News. As we mark epilepsy or National Epilepsy Week, perhaps just briefly give us a background in terms of understanding what exactly is epilepsy and just to make the public aware of this.
Yeah, so it's in fact probably better considered the epilepsies. So there are many causes. It presents in many ways. As you've heard, it's very common. And although the stereotype is that people fall on the ground and convulse, lots of people don't. They have minor seizures, and some of those may evolve into bigger seizures. But in principle, all that happens in the brain is a very temporary dysfunction of a group of brain cells, which just, in very lay terms, has an electrical storm. And depending on where that storm happens in the brain, the thing can look differently from one person to the next or from one seizure to the next. So that's really the sort of crux of it. And given how common it is, and you've just heard how common it is, the effects on people's lives is disproportionately great. And the tragedy of it really is that it's a legacy of our past, both religious and historical. And so a lot of myths about it. People are perceived to be possessed by the devil. And all of these stigmas have been carried over for many, many years, hundreds of years, in fact. And the net result of it is that people suffer. They suffer the stigma. And despite the fact that you've heard that it's very common, most people don't disclose it or try not to disclose it.
Yeah. And perhaps if you could just take us through what an epileptic seizure is, if you can just paint a picture for us, what happens when someone gets an epileptic seizure?
So do you mean what happens in the brain, or what do they look like or feel like?
I think if you can cover the aspects of it, I think it will be helpful to our viewers.
Yeah. So you have a little electrical storm in the brain, and it's much shorter. It typically lasts seconds to 2 minutes. And depending on where it is, as I said earlier, it looks different from one person to the next. So the brain is regionally specialized. And so if it involves areas that move your limbs or your body, then people convulse. So they shake, and the muscles might stiffen, they might fall to the ground. The jaw might be tonically clenched, because just like the limb muscles are stiff, the jaw muscles are stiff, and they might bite their tongue in the process. It's a bit of a myth that people swallow their tongue. Nobody in the world's ever swallowed their tongue. And it's a bit of a myth that you should put something in their mouth to stop them biting their tongue, because what you'll do in the process is break their teeth, while if they bite their tongue, it recovers within a matter of a few days. So no need to intervene at that point. But that's a major seizure. And depending on where a seizure happens, as I said earlier, you might just have certain experiences. So if it's in what the part of the brain that we use for vision, you might see things. And if it's part of the brain where you remember things, you might experience déjà vu much more frequently than most of us experience. Or you might remember something from your past, or you might smell things, or taste things, or hear things, or see things, formed images. These are characterized by the fact that they are the same from one attack to the next. They're short, and between these attacks, people are back to normal. So while the stigma is that people who have epilepsy are intellectually impaired, that's certainly not the case. Most people who develop epileptic seizures are normal, healthy individuals, intellectually normal, and while seizures do happen in people with intellectual disabilities at a higher rate, of course, than other people, nobody's spared this. And you or I or anybody can have an epileptic seizure at any stage of our life, from when we're in the womb until the day we die.
Yeah.
And that's just a function of something that happens in the brain. Many different causes. Most of the causes are completely innocuous, little birthmarks or combination of the genes that you've got.
And Dr. Butler, when it comes to the myths associated with epilepsy, maybe if you can just take us through, why do we see so many of these myths? I mean, you even mentioning some of the things that I've been told, that when somebody gets an epileptic seizure, just be careful that they don't swallow their tongue. That's the commonalities we hear in society, and we are always told to ensure that somebody doesn't swallow their tongue. Why do we see some of these myths being associated with epilepsy, and especially why is it so common in our society that we don't even know the basics of what actually takes place when someone is having an epileptic seizure?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. So the one is that because of the stigmatization, people with the condition don't speak about it often enough. So that's the first problem. And I can tell you it's the rule rather than the exception. It's exceptional that people will disclose this condition to anybody but people who in their inner sanctum, as it were. And so when you're not telling other people that you have a particular condition, people might not know about it and be surprised when you have it. And that just perpetuates the myth. Whereas if the approach was, you and I have it, or it's common and we know everybody who has it, then the understanding of the condition would be far greater. So ignorance is at the heart of this. History is at the heart of it. And as you said in your introduction, having seen people all of my career with various forms of epilepsy, the suffering that occurs is really largely to do with life between seizures. Not when you have a seizure, but between seizures. And people are discriminated against in job applications. When they're employed, they're much more likely to be just dismissed or demoted or not promoted for spurious reasons. And likewise, kids who grow up, they're bullied, they're teased at school. As a result of that, they're less likely to get an educational qualification, either at school or tertiary qualification. So these things add up. But mostly, as you can imagine, the psyche of the individual who is subjected to this is significantly impacted by these prejudicial views.
And when it comes to educating society, especially now as we mark, National Epilepsy Week, what are you doing as the Neurological Association of South Africa to highlight these issues and to ensure that the public knows exactly what to do if they identify somebody who's having an epileptic seizure wherever they are? And basically what you are saying to us is very important for the public to also know how to identify an epileptic seizure.
Yeah, so anybody who has a neurological event, if they stare and go blank for half a minute and they're unresponsive, or they fall to the ground, or they just tell you they're feeling odd, all of those could and may well be epileptic seizures. And the important bit is to view people like this as your family member or your friend or your neighbor, and to be compassionate in the process and to try and understand what's going on. So your question about what are we trying to do? Well, via this drive through the media, we are trying to educate the public. And unfortunately, a lot of these myths about the condition and the terrible legacy that there is, and it varies from being possessed by demons to it being an infectious condition to it being something wrong with your hormones or your ancestors are unhappy with you. These are things that human beings instinctively conjure up as an explanation for this. Because it looks, when someone has a big seizure, it is frightening. It is frightening. But that doesn't mean there's something particularly wrong with them intellectually or otherwise. And they can function, people with epilepsies largely function normally in society.
All right, Dr. Butler, thank you so much for your time and that explanation. Certainly educational for many of our viewers tonight. That is Dr. James Butler, a neurologist and executive board member of the Neurological Association of South Africa.